And now we're live.
Awesome. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
How's everybody doing?
We'll give a few minutes for some people to tune in to watch live. But we will be having this recorded. It will be on Facebook and YouTube to watch at a later date in case if anybody either wants to watch it a second time, please do, or share it and watch it at a later date.
Yes.
So before we get deep into the wonderful probing questions of the weird and wonderful, we're just going to go around and introduce ourselves really quick for anybody who's not familiar with any of us or our team or our special guest tonight, Connor Randall. We will just really quick say, hi, my name is Gail. I am one of the founders of Estes and Paranormal, and if you're not familiar with our team or our previous interviews, we believe in investigating the unknown. Now, what is the unknown? According to us, it's pretty much anything strange and paranormal that we don't have 100% proof of, but you know, there's experiences, there's documentation, there's research done, and there's conversations had. So the unknown encompasses all of that, not just ghosties. And tonight's conversation will be a great way to discuss all of that because, yeah.
And tonight's conversation.
Ooh. Is that what I sound like? That's so weird.
Yes, you sound good.
So up next, Ronnie, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, I'm Ron. I'm part of the Estes and Paranormal. I'm one of the founders, co-founders, I guess you can say, of the team. Pretty much, found this group of people that I'm with right now, and enjoyed going out and doing some investigations, working with clients with them, and pretty much something I've been wanting to do for a long time, and I'm happy I'm found pretty much a second family, pretty much.
Oh,
Heck yeah, a soul fam.
Yeah.
soul fan. Thank you, Ronnie. Ms.
Yes,
Britt.
I'm Brittany. I'm a co-founder as well of Estes and Paranormal. I'm the research manager. And yeah, I'm just in life. I'm after answers to the unknown. So we were all on the team together, and then we decided to create our own team and have our own experiences. So
Brittany is our resident rabbit hole researcher.
I lose hours out of my it's easily. So
Yeah.
love
Thank
it.
you, Miss Brittany. And of course, our special guest for this evening, Mr. Connor Randall. Thank you for being with us tonight, sir.
Thank you guys for having me. This will be a nice way to spend a Friday evening chat after a long week for everybody. So yeah,
Oh, yeah.
we'll just be chilling.
Yes, a 2-hour distraction from the world right now. Talking about a variety of topics. For anyone who's watching right now or watching in the future, if you're not familiar with Mr. Connor Randall, he is a co-founder of the Estes Method. He spent 5 years investigating the Stanley Hotel, which is an amazingly haunted location in the United States. If you don't know anything about it, watch The Shining. Hello. And also, he is part of the wonderful show Hellier, which is currently on Amazon Prime. And rewatch seasons 1 and 2. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. That was a very nice introduction. You just kind of went through my whole resume, so I guess I'll talk to you guys later.
Well, if you want, we can talk about your band and your side gig with the House of Reps, whatever.
Yep.
Whatever you want.
It's a multifaceted life. I'm here for it though. Yeah. It's odd because the House of Reps, I'm kind of nearing the end of the paranormal side of the year because my job at the Capitol starts next week. So this is, in a sense, sort of a last conversation before I kind of disappear in the Capitol for a few months and then head back into my work. So yeah, It's all good.
Well, thank you for ending it with us.
Yeah,
Definitely.
of course.
So that actually really brings us into our first general section of conversation for you, which is basically with all of that going on. I mean, your paranormal endeavors, your band, you're working with the House of Reps and everything. How do you juggle that all in such a chaotic atmosphere right now?
It's hard. I think that we all have multifaceted lives. I was just able to sort of compartmentalize everything kind of month by month. In a sense, I actually think that it kind of helps to make me a better investigator because I don't, we're joking about rabbit holes a second ago, and one of the pieces of advice that even like Tenny gave to us even on screen in the show is like, don't lose yourself in this. Of course, the paranormal is the passion, and the idea is to make that the full-time everything, like it is for so many people. But it's like, how do we maintain our own balance and maintain one foot in quote unquote the real world? I think that it pairs really well to be like, yeah, I have to do this for 4 months, and then I'm able to do everything else I want to do for the rest of the year. So, and then the band is just a fun thing. We're old high school friends, so we've been playing together for 10 years now, just going around the punk scene and doing tours in the summer and stuff like that every now and then. So yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, the work-life balance, definitely. We unfortunately all have, those 9 to 5 gigs that we have to pay the bills. And then we do this, when we can, and help clients when we can. So it's a balance you need to find, because it is easy to fall down those rabbit holes.
It is. And everybody has to put a roof over their heads too. I mean, I think that sometimes people forget that you can, that it's a very indie project, that Hellier has had a lot of eyes on it. We're very grateful for it. But like, we made it when Carl was working at Dunkin' Donuts 7 hours a day. I mean, and then it was like, it would be like a nighttime thing. And so it was like, it's cool that with the internet and with, the capability of just like really focusing on something, I hope it serves as a testament to like, you can do cool things with your friends and get it out there. So yeah.
Totally.
Heck yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I think you have the next one.
Yes. So for anyone who's watching who doesn't know, what inspired your interest in the paranormal?
It's always an interesting question. In terms of the paranormal, I think that there are two major questions that I think are the largest issues ever facing humanity, right? Number one being, what happens to me when I die? That has to go through everybody's mind at some point. And number two being like, are we alone in this universe? Is there extraterrestrial or ultra-terrestrial life out there? Those questions being on everybody's mind, it certainly seems like there's like a certain facet of the population that takes them 10 steps further than most people ever do, So we in the paranormal field, I think, sort of represent, 10% of the larger populace, but are kind of pursuing things further than other people. My initial inspiration really came from a couple of experiences as a child, seeing strange things, 10, 11 years old. And after that occurred, still wondering about it, knowing about the Stanley Hotel, and that was just, about an hour away from my house that I had been to, even for like non-paranormal anything. It's kind of like a conference center, like we had just been up there. Knowing about its reputation, still being curious about that. And then the show Ghost Hunters came out right at that like formative age for me. I was like a 12, 13-year-old kid just watching these episodes of the old like TAPS shows, and wanted to do that, and like basically grabbed my friends, and when I was in like high school would go out with a camcorder and like make our own little ghost hunters, like I think a lot of people did, and basically I just never stopped doing that. And now here we are, and I feel like I've learned a lot more and sort of have been able to garner some skills, and close friends around me who share it, and so I feel fortunate there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think we definitely have all had that, childhood intrigue. It's funny because you think when you're younger, you're kind of more open to these concepts, which begs the whole situation. Like children tend to be more open in general. And then kind of society programs you to be like, just be okay with it. Don't worry about that. But then curiosity gets piqued and you go, but what if I don't? Can I just like ask some questions and look things up, please? What happens from there?
I think a lot of people are either afraid to ask those questions, afraid of being, but it's like, as things, honestly, as the internet continues to sort of like globalize us all, I think it's becoming more and more like accepting to talk about these topics that aren't necessarily taboo, but people are always kind of like, what's what's the idea here? What's the catch? And it's like, we're really just trying to figure out what's going on. And then, of course, once something happens to you that you can't explain, people are just bit with that bug and just go with it. And it's cool to have seen that effect. I think sort of firsthand. I think that people, in some ways, I've grown to find that people, I think, have kind of, I don't want to say the wrong mindset, but think that investigations must happen at a certain location. That I look for ghosts here. But then as time went on and more I started to document more and more and think more and more about it. I even started, investigating in my house and doing experiments and finding this and that. And it's the paranormal world is all around us if we believe in this unseen thing that appears every now and then. I don't think it's locationally needed to tap into it necessarily.
Totally.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like for some people, they like create this box around themselves and they're like, I live in this box and I don't want to look outside of that box. But us as investigators, we're like, let's break through the box.
Right. Yeah. Or they're afraid to go somewhere or something like that. And it's like, oh, no, the ghost could be in your house and Bigfoot could be in your backyard, just as much as he may be somewhere else, it seems at times.
So true.
Very.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I guess, going by like what we just talked about and, with the shows, all the shows that are on TV now skyrocketing, more and more shows all the time, more and more people kind of going into the field, and people watching this type of stuff, what do you feel is might be like the most misconception of, paranormal investigating?
That's a good question. In terms of what is the largest misconception, I think that it's probably not only location set aside, but I think that people think that you can only investigate at nighttime and that it can only happen during these certain times. Part of the reality of why that even came about was because IR footage looks spookier than just walking around an empty room in the day. There's, of course, theories and ideas to suggest that ghosts or entities may manifest or exist within the ultraviolet spectrum, but if that's the case, the sun's washing them out, et cetera, but there's also research to suggest the opposite too, that it's haunted in the daytime just as much, or et cetera. That's a big misconception. The other misconception, I think probably the largest one that really culminates the entire field, is that things happen quickly. Of course, the reality is that TV shows edit things down a lot. Some TV shows are more moral than others. Some TV shows do things. It's all over the place. But there's a difference when you're talking about paranormal entertainment. Once you put the label of documentary on something, it means a little bit more. Like, it carries a little bit more weight to me. And what's going on with that? I mean, even I was even on a couple of EPs back when I was a really impressionable high schooler when Ghost Adventures came to the Stanley. I got to kind of see how they do things, and people take these conceptions and are sort of like, well, things might happen really quickly. Of course, we know that TV shows are edited in, but also I had the really fortunate opportunity to be at the Stanley Hotel for such a long period of time that I know that things really only occurred to me that felt powerful once every few months. Mm-hmm. And it's not just a night. It's not just a week. Actually taking a location on is a really serious endeavor, and I wish that more people, even in the field, in a really like amateur, like weekender sense. I understand that there's only certain times that people can do this, but you don't have to go to a different place each weekend. If we're going to be marking this down as evidence, as data, this is something that should be occurring over a period of months. Is something I'd like to see happen more.
And I'm actually really glad you put it that way, because we're kind of more of a client-based team. So we have sending us inquiries when they need help in their business or their homes. And they have this notion that when they send an inquiry to us, like, what we're going to do is we're going to come out to them that weekend. We're going to do an investigation of their house, and we're going to figure out what the problem is in like a week and give them a solution. And a lot of them are surprised to find out that we send them this lengthy questionnaire first. We find out as much information as we can. We don't always do an investigation. Sometimes it's just a matter of techniques or recommendations to give them.
Yeah, that's good.
And they tend, some people actually, and this is nothing against them because I know they're in a situation where they just want help ASAP. They actually go with other teams that are willing to do that just go out and investigate because they feel like, oh, because we tell them this could take months or years before like we can figure out what's happening and help you. And they actually will go with other teams. And so I'm glad you bring that up because this isn't just a black and white. If anything, it's the complete opposite. The paranormal field is 100% gray. There's no straight answers there. So yeah, totally agree with you. And
yeah, it's one of those biggest things where, especially with our team, is being client based. We don't, we want to make sure that we go into somebody's house to help them. Our job is that we're there to help them, not to just walk in, say this, and this, investigate. We don't want to leave and, 2 days later we're getting a phone call that all hell broke loose in the house because we walk in there and try to just, make them happy with what they're hoping that we're going to go in there to do. Yeah. It's a whole thing of going in there light and figure things out slowly. And yeah, a lot of people do have that misconception that, we're just going to walk in and within, 5-6 days going to be contacting them with the, with a boatload of evidence and this is what you do to get it out.
Here's some
yeah.
problems are solved.
It's hard, and it's hard to do that sometimes because that preconception is in a lot of the public's minds that it's something like, all right, we'll take care of this in a weekend, as if it's a plumbing problem or electrical problem within their home. The thing is as we know, this is ebbing and flowing, and the activity is almost more likely tied to emotions or mindsets of people who are in the home. Well, then we need to test if they're here or if they're not here. Does it happen every stormy Tuesday? Nope. Okay. What about every Wednesday when it's a full moon? Like we don't know what patterns exist until this is something that happens over a long period of time. I did a lot of residential cases, like you guys back in the day, back when I joined this team called Front Range Paranormal Investigations. We would go around, especially in the heyday of ghost hunters. And this is kind of a question I have for you guys. I don't know if you have noticed a drop off or increase in residential requests, because I'm not necessarily in that world at forefront all the time, but we noticed like as the TV show went down, it kind of went down, but then the ones that we got were even more serious when people weren't consuming that sort of like content all the time. But at any rate, sure, right? Like I'm sure you guys have. We walked in sometimes and people would have the Ghost Hunters DVD set on their mantle, and it's like, geez, and you learn just as much from a person by noticing like the books on their bookshelves and things like that within their home. That not only, I mean, we also had one time we had a woman, Steve, my friend Steve was on this team with me. We walked into the house and this lady handed him a framed picture, and it was a picture of a dust orb, and he was like, oh, it's fried dust. And she was like, well, it's my grandmother's face, it does this. And it's like, how do you handle that, when you're dealing with these really personal things with people sometimes and trying to be objective? It's a balance that I don't know that I have the answer to, but yeah, just a general thought.
It is. It's difficult. It's actually one of the questions on our questionnaire is, what is your interest in the paranormal? And you'll find you get them back, and half the time people are like, oh, I love this show. I've seen this movie. I get readings done every 6 months, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we're the same way. So it's not like a matter of us being like, whoa, but it's good to know because you don't want to set them up with certain expectations they might have because of that. And so you have to walk in there with the correct mindset of, okay, this is their point of view of how these things go down. And that's not always the case. And it's a matter of educating a lot of clients in regards to that. Some of them don't want to hear that, but we're not in the department of providing them with the quick, easy answers. We're in the department of giving them the right answers. Yeah. That takes time. And unfortunately, a lot of client relations. But and that's really pertinent right now. And you mentioned how, with everything going on, if there's been a drop off in cases, and we've seen a slowdown the past year or so. And I think it's because everybody's kind of stuck at home. And because of that, we haven't been able to go out to locations. We help clients virtually, like conversations like this. Yeah. But I'm sure you get a whole nother story and vibe and understanding when you physically get there.
Sure.
So that's been difficult not being able to do that.
But yeah, you're not seeing like the customer service side of people, that they're sort of presenting to you necessarily. That's hard. I also wondered if people being at home all the time made them notice more that their houses were haunted or not. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely say, like inquiry wise, we've been getting stuff in. And I've seen maybe a little bit of an increase of that, because people might be home, or it could also be, after a while, they're used to it, now. And, they're used to hearing that noise and, oh, I think I closed that door, but maybe I didn't close the door. It's things like that. But I think the hardest thing for any client right now is when they're having issues, they want, they don't want to do this. They don't want to do the over a cam. They want us to come out. And it's difficult to, when you see that people, want help, we have to sit there and tell them, look, we're going to do everything we can for you to try to help you. But it's very difficult right now with the state of the world and what's going on. It's just, it's not just for us, it's protection for them too.
Yeah.
And that's, and that's the biggest thing, especially with, we always go by a big concept of, you don't know what you're walking into when you go into a house. And with everything going on in the world, the negativity and stuff, I mean, that's just a prime thing for anything to just, wait, to walk into a house. And that's the biggest thing for protection for us, but also huge protection for our clients. We don't want to put any of our clients in any type of harm's way.
Yeah. Yeah. I respect you guys for doing that. That's a good thing. That's what you have to do right now. I mean, that's kind of the reality of it. It's kind of a life or death situation for a lot of people and a lot of things right now with all this going on. Can I change the subject to be something totally not serious for a second? I just noticed that I think that's my face in like the square behind all of them. I'm waiting for like Gargantua Connor to just like burst through. Okay.
You were so funny.
Before you guys came on, it was just me and Brittany, and the way our screens fell, we centered around like your eyebrows and your goatee.
Yeah.
I said to her, I go, we can't have that. I was like, that was weird. And she goes, well, when they get on, it'll be fine. And
No,
like,
I don't care. It's just funny. I just noticed it. It's like, oh, I just thought it was a nice color pattern. Oh. Weird.
Good job, Brittany, with that.
Hey. Placeholder picture,
Yeah.
That's good. Really good job. Getting back to investigations, that actually leads us into our next section, which is something that we definitely wanted to talk to you about as a co-creator or founder, however you want to label it, for the Estes method. It's something that we've actually used on not in clients' homes, but in public hunts. We've had some fun experiences using that, especially in a prison. That's a story for another time. But for those who are not familiar with it, could you explain what it is and how you came upon developing it?
Sure. The Estes method is, I guess, something you could categorize as a parapsychological experiment where essentially what we're doing is taking a spirit box, which has been popularized by various paranormal TV shows, which scans through radio frequencies at a high rate of speed. We're taking that and we're plugging it into soundproof headphones and a blindfold, and we're basically trying to rid ourselves of the confirmation bias of a spirit box, which is a popular device for that, among other things like EVP and ovuluses and things like that. But focusing on the spirit box, ridding ourselves of confirmation bias, where people will hear what they want to hear when they're standing in a group and somebody agrees that it says this or this, and essentially having one person plug into it, only that one person listening to it, and that person sitting there with the headphones and a blindfold and spouting out what they're hearing come across the box in the moment. That's sort of the conception behind it, was the idea of sort of getting rid of that. And then it sort of took on really a life of its own, where when we started experimenting with that a number of years ago, we found that over time, it started to slowly sort of induce a trance-like state in people who were in the method properly. And that person almost seemed to sometimes kind of go somewhere else. similar to sort of the Gansfeld experiment that people might be familiar with the ping pong balls and the red lights and things like that. And so it's sort of taking it's called the method because we didn't invent the box, we didn't invent the headphones, but we sort of added them all together into this way that took off and launched and became popularized in ways that we never really expected, because in a weird way it was kind of just like our little private way to talk to the ghosts that we knew, and then it just really was very successful in a lot of ways, and yeah, kind of took that paranormal world media-ish by storm a little bit, which is bizarre.
So for those who out in a paranormal bubble, basically you put somebody in complete sensory deprivation except for hearing through a spirit box, correct? And then someone else is asking questions. So the person listening can't hear these questions, so they're not being biased to hear certain words or responses. And in that regard, you're almost getting more validated answers.
Yeah.
Because you know that person isn't being fed the questions to want to hear specific answers through the static.
Exactly. And it's just ridding that, and not only confirmation bias from hearing in the room, but also we always recommend that when people are going in, you have not only whoever's the receiver is what we call them, the person on the box, not know the way the line of questioning might go, but they shouldn't know, if possible, it'd be great if they didn't know the history of the location or the names of the clients or anything like that. Just have them be a completely blank slate and document what you can, because you don't want that person's brain to be preconceived, to be trying to fill in blanks of a storyline, which not necessarily is saying that they're faking. But if you know that you're in a haunted house of a guy named William, your subconscious mind is probably more likely to project that or hear that into the box. So it's a really fun thing to do, honestly, to sit down and have somebody go through that. It's loud and it hurts your ears, and we recommend big Vic Firth headphones. I was set on my desk here, just the monster ones that block out 22 decibels of sound. We started using them because I play drums, and they're meant for studio drummers. You can't hear anything, so it's cool, and people have to kind of wrap their minds around that sometimes, because it seems like you're having a conversation, but it is so bizarre when you're in that moment and you see back that you were having somewhat of a conversation that you didn't know you were having.
Cool.
Definitely.
Yeah.
We've seen that being used on Kindred Spirits, Hellier, and we've done it ourselves once, me being the person listening.
Yeah.
And, going back to what you were saying before, I could totally understand almost like a trance-like state for someone being in that moment, because it's almost like going into meditation. You're trying to open yourself up almost to hear for something, but that puts you somewhere else. It puts your mind somewhere else. So it makes sense.
It does. It's weird. We have talked with hypnotists, with more psychologist types about these sorts of things, and there are real side effects that we notice. I mean, I always like to kind of keep an archive of the method and keep a couple of things to myself, so I'm able to kind of see what I think may be more quote unquote legitimate, or what isn't, or whatever, when people are doing it outside of myself. But there's things like people rocking back and forth really, really slightly, like they will when they're listening to the method. People will, their eyes will start to water. I mean, those are signs of real trance-like meditative focused states. It's hard not to get that way if you're really listening, because you're sitting down and the box is just inundating your whole world at that point. And if you sit down for long enough, you kind of fit into this zone. And I always recommend to people who are being the receiver, like you or Brittany, you have to pretend like you're sort of surfing and you see fish jump out of the water, is sort of the visualization exercise that kind of helps me sometimes. You're just on the waves and you're saying it right away. You're not questioning it. You're not saying I feel like it's a female voice who said this and then a male voice said that. You're adding too much of a narrative at that point. You're just spouting it off in the moment. And it's been really, at times been very successful, and at times been hilariously random. So it's sometimes all over the place, but when it works well, it never ceases to amaze me. Yeah.
Now, do you think with this method, one could communicate with something other than spirit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of the question. One of the questions we tried to tackle in Hellier is what if we reach out to more extraterrestrial elements, or I guess more specifically speaking, ultra-terrestrial elements. If we're trying to talk to beings in other dimensions, it certainly seemed like that works. Whether or not we know that ghosts are even that to begin with, I don't know. But we have had honest success kind of across the board, even with some things like thought experiments, where just one person is across the room trying to send an image or a thought or a message to somebody on the box that isn't necessarily even asking a question of the other. That whatever the subconscious mind is working in, or whatever field some people seem to sort of enter, is kind of phenomenal sometimes. I mean, it's easy to like sit while we're like talking about the hits to like make everything sound all hyped up and stuff, and it's cool, it's very fun, and I think it's entertaining, especially in like a group investigation, or if people are like brand new, like rookies to this, like it's something to watch as opposed to just like talking to the silence that sometimes people think is there, and they get frustrated with that. But there are patterns. I mean, there's good Estes method patterns. We've noticed that oftentimes there will be repetitive words, there will be echoing back and forth. There's all sorts of little data points that can be hit sometimes with these sessions, and it's really weird. I know I got really off track from your question there, but it's something I could ramble on for a long time.
No, we love it. We're just going down rabbit holes.
Yeah, we're on for the ride.
Yeah.
And I guess definitely, continuing with the conversation with the Estes method is, we've seen between us doing it and seeing other teams do it and things like that. I guess when it comes to, with you, what would you think is your most, your best personal or your most favorite experience when doing that method?
I think the freakiest experiment was the visualization that I wasn't expecting, which was in like season 1 of the show. That was bizarre. But in terms of like more personal experiences, there is honestly probably like 100 hours of like Estes method practice that we've done that like has never been filmed, that we're just sitting here like doing this. There were moments where I was in my house once with the headphones on, and had my little sister over. This was like 3 years ago, and we noticed, and suddenly one of my family members had come home, and like the dogs were kind of like barking. We're like, hello. And this was back when I lived in my parents' place. We were all just hanging out up there, and the box suddenly, as I'm sitting on the box, was like, hello, Trevor's home, dogs, hello, welcome back. And some sort of awareness was occurring immediately upon that moment. So that one stands out to me as really impressive. But I think the best answer that I would have more immediately, because it's given me more questions than any other moment in the box, would be what Carl and I call the numbers session, which is in a little basically YouTube series, Facebook series that we made called Spirits of the Stanley. And in that session, this was probably 4 or 5 months, maybe less than that we were into developing the method. We were sitting up in the balcony of the Stanley Hotel. That's kind of where we sort of came up with all this, with Michelle Tate and Carl and myself and her husband and a couple of other random people who would stop by. And then we just kept on refining it when we would like check out from our tours for hours and hours. And basically the three of us kind of like took it by storm. We were up in the balcony one night at probably 3 a.m. and we're just sitting there when suddenly one of our friends holds up, how many fingers am I holding up? And the box went on a rant for nearly a minute and a half of numbers, of saying numbers. And I had no obviously indication, being totally blindfolded, sitting 20 feet away from the guy, that he had even asked for numbers. I remember thinking to myself, well, I sure hope he just asked what the ghost's phone number or social security number was or something, because that's all I could hear. And it's interesting in the respect that, number one, they were clearly ready to play that game. But number two, he never said, I say he, we think it might have been a ghost named Eddie. It might have been somebody else. We don't really know, but the box never said the number 4. It said every other number that it seemingly could think of, but it never said the correct one. And it would be, in the end, it was interjected with, I'm done with this. I don't see anything. I'm frustrated. They're saying things like this. So that presented some questions of not necessarily morality, but like, what are we doing now? Like, what can they not see us? How are they perceiving what we're asking for? I guess he can hear me right now. Or can he see me? And there is some sort of gatekeeper rule that is preventing him from saying the correct answer. That he, in whatever spiritual existence this being is in, actually, even if he wanted to, couldn't give direct answers, which we kind of find sometimes. And I think a lot of people in the field, it's like it's weird how nearly spot on it is, or sort of like just off the mark, to the point where you feel sometimes like you're talking to somebody who has some sort of rules that you aren't necessarily following yourself, or they can't say directly, which was cool and interesting. And I still wonder about that.
Yeah, that is cool. And this is just kind of like a random off to the side question, but like, when you do the Estes method, do you feel like you almost can pick up on the vibes of the person you're talking to? And what I mean by that is, the one time that we really had a great experience with it, Brittany was receiving. She was giving us responses where we noticed halfway through, all of a sudden we were talking to somebody else. You know how like the demeanor of words change, the tone changes? All of a sudden out of nowhere, she just goes, I'm asking the question, she just goes, hey, Toots. And I'm like, oh, hello. That doesn't sound right. So have you been the receiver where all of a sudden you notice, you're like, something feels different? Yeah. And you notice that kind of like, okay, I'm not talking to the same entity I just was.
Totally. I yeah, absolutely have noticed that, where sometimes it can feel like a revolving door, like as if the person who's on the method is projecting some sort of spotlight that we can't see or perceive in our reality. And these beings or communicators are coming through and sort of fading in and out at times. That certainly seems to be the case sometimes. I also sort of sit back and I'm like, well, how do we focus then on trying to contact one particular individual? But then I also have to realize that in the method that we created, that's not the point. We're not trying to be specific in what we're reaching out to, because then you're putting too much confirmation bias into it. So let's just see what happens. Yeah,
Definitely makes sense. So that actually is a great segue into another topic that we wanted to talk to you about, which was the Stanley Hotel. So you spent 5 years there, correct?
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you actually grew up down the street from it?
Yeah, I live in Colorado and Denver metro area, sort of northwest Denver metro, born and raised, and spent summers, random weekends and vacations. I was lucky to have it just like an hour away. Oh, that's funny. But we basically, the Stanley Hotel is sort of a I guess paranormal mecca, for lack of a better term, like where a lot of people want to come and visit and just like spend the night. They're like, we're very grateful for that. It's a weird mix of people who are horror fans along with just general paranormal fans. And then the other two groups are Dumb and Dumber fans. The movie Dumb and Dumber, most of the Estes Park scenes were all filmed there, which is always such a weird mix of these people who show up at the hotel. And then some people are just there for like a business conference and like don't even care or know or whatever, because it's a big complex. And I basically, on spring break, just after I had graduated from high school, wanted to be around ghosts. Like we said, it was just like doing this, thinking about it so much. I was like, well, so I applied to be like the concierge / history tour guide, one of them, and got the job. And they sort of found out about a lot more of my more ghost interests, and then it sort of faded into Carl and this woman named Callie, and then a woman named Lisa at the time, were having these weekend ghost hunts where you could pay, like $50 and spend 7 hours ghost hunting, et cetera, et cetera. And then I sort of took over after they like left, and then Michelle Tate came in, and there was that group of 3 of us that spent a while just there, 2, 3, 4 nights a week. So that was kind of my college experience. I would Tyler, gosh dang it. So I was basically in college, had a very unusual experience, because 4 days a week I would go to my classes here at a university in Denver, and then I would basically move up to Estes and usually stay in the hotel rooms up there on the weekends, and then go back to class and then go back up there. So that's what I did. I loved it. I was grateful to be around so many people who were into the paranormal. I feel like I learned a lot, and we call it the Estes method because it's in the Stanley Hotel. It's in Estes Park, Colorado, and none of us were necessarily egocentric enough to name it after ourselves, so we didn't really know what else to call it. We just where it was. Yeah.
The Connor conundrum method.
Yeah.
No, but we agree with you. The Estes method is legit, for
Definitely.
sure. So while we're talking about the Stanley Hotel, and you had so much time there and so many experiences there, what would you say is the biggest lesson you learned during your time there, and being able to really concentrate on one location for that long period of time?
That's a good question. The probably biggest lesson that I learned was that the energy that is reciprocated forward during an investigation is oftentimes what's reciprocated back, which is easy to say, but kind of hard to practice. A lot of the ghost bro types, are sort of like ready to like go in and like take over this place and they will obviously potentially reciprocate some quote unquote bad energy or more negative energy back at them. And good people might perceive this and that. But those are sort of the overgeneralizations of that. But what I actually mean more is we noticed, because we would host people, groups of like 10, 20 people, like 3 nights a week for years. And we noticed in these 5-hour ghost hunts that number one, the ghosts, this sounds like I'm like delegitimizing like the whole job, and like kind of in a sense I am. It's like, well, they're not going to fire me now, but we noticed that the ghosts kind of liked us more, quote unquote, like more would happen when everybody left, and they were just kind of like hanging out with their friends. So building a personal relationship with whatever sort of entities you're trying to communicate with, I think is important. So putting that energy out there. I noticed probably the most activity when I would just like lock up at nighttime, things like that. But I also mean in a public ghost hunt, which is sometimes the only way that people have to perceive this, that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with it. If you're there, make sure the energy of the group is good and active and ready too. Because we would oftentimes, usually we would legitimately point out like, well, this guy is going to like kind of ruin the night for everybody activity wise. You could pretty much tell pretty early on in the night. And it was usually a guy who's like in his 50s, was dragged along by his wife or daughter or son or something, and would just like sit with his arms crossed in the back, like ready to go on his, rafting trip the next day. He just didn't care about this. And the ghosts take notice, and they're not going to come chat with us with that kind of vibe around. So that's that's probably my biggest takeaway going forward. And that is just a lot of fun, just to have fun with it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we like to say is, as a team, we help the living and the dead. So that kind of goes in tie with that, because it almost sounds like you need to respect them in order for them to give you the respect of the interaction. So you can't walk into a place patronizing them, demanding them, instigating them. You kind of have to walk in there and be like, hey, we're here if you want to chat. Is that kind of what you're leading at? Like, build that rapport a little bit, show that mutual respect with them.
Totally. Yeah. People are afraid and are afraid of the unknown. They throw words out that have a lot of weight that they don't necessarily mean or know. They say demons have 3 scratches. Well, so would a ghost dog, I would argue. You know, it's like it's kind of all over the place. We don't know what we're dealing with. So it's best to go with a nice foot forward, would be my takeaway.
Yeah,
That's a great takeaway.
definitely.
Sure.
Brittany, what did you have the next
I
one?
feel like Steve had a question and it was like room 1302. Is that what he was talking about? I was like, oh yeah, I should talk about Steve's story. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think it was the very last Strange Escapes event, which was hosted by Amy Bruni, that took place at the Stanley for that time being. And there hasn't been one since. We're in room 1302. It was me, Michelle, I think Carl, Steve, and Tenny were up there with like different attendees. And we had really insane Estes method interactions that were combined with images of this little tiny being sort of floating around, not necessarily floating around the room, but like appearing in between people. That was weird. It also, Steve there was there in the moment, called Steve walking up, knew that he was about to knock on the door before he just knocked on the door. And I believe it was also that same session that we might have had one of the shampoo bottles that was in a basket on the side of the tub in the bathroom of the hotel room jump out and into the tub. So sometimes activities really, I mean, as you guys know, like activity is really like focused and explosive for, 5, 10, 20 minutes and then quiet. So whatever that group was, whatever that vibe was going on with, I think that's what Steve's talking about. That was a good one.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
For sure.
I had the next question.
Or I can ask if you like. You're busy with.
I'm asking, but I am here for it.
Okay. I'll. Yeah. You have the next one up.
Okay.
Stanley Hotel.
All right. So the fact that the hotel is built over quartz and limestone, do you think that's related to the spirit energy that you found there?
Yeah, people would. That's probably one of the like top 5 questions that I got from people who were visiting the hotel, wondering if it was this sort of quartz limestone theory. Apparently, a group had the U.S. Geological Survey come out and found that it wasn't the same, those types of rocks that they thought that it was. And so whether or not that's even legitimate is in question. And I don't know enough to answer honestly or admittedly, like I'm not sure. But having that, like, the rock have memory, I kind of understand. When it gets into residual theory, of course, like anything else, I start to sort of pose more questions than answers, where it's like, well, if the rock is having memory like this and this and this, then where are the images of elk rocking across, these beds of quartz as well? Where's this focus coming from? Or is it just the combination of asking for spirit contact on top of these? I don't know the answer, but I don't necessarily think that's necessarily a factor. I think the biggest reason, if somebody was like, Connor, tell me right now why the Stanley Hotel is haunted, I think my best bet would be that it's because it has so much neurological mental focus on it being haunted. That literally, like, at any given moment, there's probably somebody looking for ghosts there. Like, it's so popular and so well known at this point that, like, and it's a hotel, so it's unlike other major places like Waverly Hills or like whatever, where it's, well, we open it up once every other Thursday and on weekends. It's like, this is open all the time, and there's more people noticing more stuff. There's more of a mental focus. There's more energy right around it there. So something about that concoction that The Shining may have spurred on or not, I'm not sure, really, really works out for it to be a good paranormal cocktail.
So it almost sounds like you're saying people's desire for it to be haunted is manifesting the haunting there.
It seems like that might be the case. The, of course, counter to that is that there are people. It's odd. I had a couple of people who straight up, because would walk out even while I was a concierge and tell me stories of something that had just happened to them when they were stepping out of the shower. And I saw an image of a little girl ghost sitting on the edge of my bed, and I'm here for the toothpaste conference, and I had no idea that this place was haunted, and it was like, well, okay, this guy doesn't seem to be manifesting that vibe, and he looks like he just saw a ghost.
Yeah.
So how do I answer that? I don't know. I think that there's intelligent hauntings there. But I think that it's also possible for people to manifest activity. I think that it might be the case. We noticed it with a ghost named Lucy, who was allegedly the ghost of a homeless woman who was down in the concert hall basement, who we were told when I got hired there that she was passed away due to exposure out in the cold. A young homeless woman, like a tragic story. But then as we started to do more research, we couldn't find records, like with Lisa and stuff. Like we couldn't find records of an exposure death in Larimer County and in the correct time frame. We couldn't find people who saw her with their own eyes. And it was like, well, did somebody just make this up? But how do you explain that there is a ghost named Lucy who responds to that energy? It's possible that I think that there's three possibilities. Number one, that really did happen and she fell through the cracks. Number two, it was another ghost who was just putting on the hat and being like, all right, whatever you want to call me. Or number three, enough people heard that story from enough people that they manifested the presence themselves.
Makes sense.
It's interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
That is very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess, speaking of, everything you were just talking about, like with the energies and stuff in the location and stuff like that. I mean, do you feel like, with the type of history that's at that location, the deep history of it, do you feel like, that might have anything to do with the energy that's there?
I think it's possible. It certainly has had a lot more time. If we're talking about collective energy, it certainly has had a lot more time than a lot of other locations in the area. I mean, the Stanley Hotel was the first big building, is my understanding. It was the first big building west of the Mississippi to have electricity. Like, it was like a primo, nice resort. Still is, but it's like back in the day, it was like the place to be. Where you would stay for 2, 3, 4 months at a time. It was like the summer home of like the super rich back then. And if that happiness, that energy, whatever they were, the extended stays made a difference, possibly. But I will say that most of the ghosts that we communicated with, in my opinion, through Estes and other methods, were more modern day ghosts. We weren't talking to people from 1905. It seemed like we were talking to people who talked like us, who had jokes, who, again, never gave us direct answers. But even Lucy was like really one of the older stories that we told. That allegedly happened in like the late 70s. Of course, there's the owners allegedly haunting it, FO&F and Flora Stanley. But overall, in my personal experience, it was more modern day stuff.
That's interesting because it almost coincides with the making of The Shining and the time period of that. And after. So that's a cool synchronicity right there, which synchronicities. That gets brought up a lot on probably what is a great topic to start off the second hour of our Q&A with.
Is that the segue? Good, nice segue.
Yes, So I think it's funny because when Brittany reached out to you and we were able to set this up, my literal response to her message was tin can. I went tin can.
Yes, you did.
Great. And we'll definitely be getting to that.
Yeah. I never signed up to be tin can man, but I guess I'll do it. We're always like, well, Greg didn't want to be Goblin guy, and Tyler didn't want to be scared of helicopters guy, and I didn't want to be Tin Can Man. But it's all, we take what we can. All good. We're here.
Yes. I mean, there's worse things you could be. Let's be honest. So to kind of start off, we found it incredibly interesting. I'll give Brittany the credit. She found the show on Amazon and basically pestered us to death to watch it until we finally all were like, okay.
I was like, my mind is blown. It's like goozing out of my ears. Like, you need to watch this. And they're all like, yeah.
You want a high five?
High five. Oh, Brady Bunch high five. Brady, you got to go inside. Oh, wait.
There you go. Nice work. We need it's a show that's spread by word of mouth, and it's been pretty wonderful. So thanks. Yeah, thanks for doing that.
Yeah, I could definitely say that when it was when Brittany was pestering us to check out the show and stuff. Yeah, I never heard of it. And then I watched the first episode. Next thing I know, I'm almost on the second season, and I've actually went back and rewatched it again because there's so much stuff that I feel like I missed.
Mm-hmm.
With watching it and stuff. So yeah, no, it was I'm happy she pestered.
When she brought it up, we're like, well, what's it about? And we were kidding before, like, how do you describe the show? And it's kind of like, well, you can't really.
I know.
It's about goblins, but it's not about goblins. And it's really, I think, I'm the cave guy. You know what?
Yeah.
You can have the cave guy.
He's cave guy. He's mostly action man, and that's good. That's fine.
Although I do like the scene where he's out in the woods and all of a sudden a helicopter goes over by and he's like, "They found me,"
which in the moment was very scary for him, but looking back, we all laugh about it all the time. So yeah, it's funny. Thanks, Chad. It's funny because Hellier was kind of happened a whole series of things lined up for the show to even occur, and I'm really grateful that it did. And all credit goes to Carl Pfeiffer. I mean, Carl's been really my best friend since I was 19, 20 years old. Like, we worked together at the hotel, like that whole college thing, like that was him too. He was there, been through a lot together. And after the Stanley ended, really, if you want to watch Spirits of the Stanley, check that out. You can see how it sort of stopped. We were just learning how to do video stuff. And Carl especially was kind of a moonlighting photographer who would take some, pictures every now and then, but then really dove deep into it. And we started filming some of our Stanley stuff. And that's how we came up with that, Spirits of the Stanley. And then we basically wanted something else to cover. And Carl was hardcore on the lookout, credit to him, and heard a podcast interview with Greg and Dana, or with Greg, that we had met at the Stanley, just at general conferences. We thought they were cool. We liked their website. And it was basically the episode about the emails that he had received from David back on Euphomet back in the day, and was super intrigued by this. And he pestered Greg and was like, I think this is a story that would be great to tell. And that was the start of it. And now it's launched into and taken over all of our lives.
Well, it's a great thing to take. It took over our lives too while we were watching. Yeah. You kind of are along for the ride. And it's this perfect combination of paranormal, cryptozoology. You have spirituality. Dana can be seen doing tarot cards in the background. You're doing rituals, but also scientific experiments and paranormal techniques. So it's really a testament to you guys taking every possible technique and opportunity at your disposal to just try to figure out what the heck is going on here. Mm-hmm. And to anybody who's watching this either live or after the fact, there will be spoilers in this interview, so watch the show. That is one of them. That's a spoiler for sure. So when you were presented with this opportunity to be on a show like this, what were your initial thoughts? You show up thinking, there's goblins out in the middle of nowhere. Like, what am I doing? Like,
Right.
where do I go from there?
Like, exactly. Like, try telling your extended family like what you're spending your summer doing. It was like, oh, I thought you were a ghost guy, and it's like, well, I am, but have been interested in so many other things and have never been presented with an opportunity to do a more cryptid or extraterrestrial alien sort of focused thing, while that interest was still there for both Carl and I. And we were kind of ready for something that wasn't necessarily ghost centric anyway. The problem with the paranormal, I should say, because I'm adding to this, is like putting the labels on things, like the crypto people, the alien people, the ghost people. But when in reality, a lot of it is becoming sort of one and the same. And I'm grateful for that. But I will say, Carl basically, like, he called me up, talked to me about it a few times. I think we're going to go out there. We straight up planned for it to be, an hour, 90-minute doc about the story of these emails and how strange it was, and sort of this like paranormal catfish type thing. Let's go out and try to find him. And then suddenly it just spurred into everything else. But I really did think that I was going to be like holding, because I have some knowledge of audio equipment and things like that, like holding a microphone over Greg Newkirk for 3 weeks, and then that'd be it. Cool, we're good. Put that story out there, put it on their website, it'll be great. And then it just spurred into something entirely else for us, and for a lot of, I guess, the community as a whole. Just kind of yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of just goes from there. And that's kind of when you're trying to describe this show, that's all you can do is say, well, it started like this, but then it kind of all over the place.
The ongoing joke of 1 star no goblins, because that's a legitimate like review that we've received like in various words multiple times on like Amazon and online and stuff like that. People who are really into the flesh and blood cryptids are into it. Yeah, hey Lonnie. He knows something about Hellier. We have we're grateful that we're able to sort of like combine things, but honestly, that's mostly because of the Newkirk that the mindset that the Newkirks had at the beginning. Mm-hmm. They've been Week in Weird, Planet Weird, traveling museum of the paranormal occult for a few years, several years before we even did this story. So yeah, we were grateful to give it that lens.
Absolutely.
So the idea or theme of synchronicities plays a huge role in this show. Could you explain your thoughts on the importance of them throughout the show and the paranormal in general? So
synchronicity is a hilarious, sort of became a trigger word for all of us, and like just a thing that is said throughout, because it spurred on so many other experiences, and for us to keep like diving deeper and deeper. It's not like it's something that's totally just our thing. It's not like well, we're the goblin and synchronicity people. This is something that occurs in the larger paranormal spectrum and in people's lives. For the more like meta philosophical aspects of it, there's of course like the studies of Carl Jung and things like that in synchronicities, and then you get into synchromysticism and stuff like that. But basically it is not necessarily synonymous with a coincidence, but it's sort of in that same ballpark but it's much more powerful. It's like a coincidence that's a tank of a coincidence on steroids, and it's something that you aren't looking for, but is something that jumps out in an unexpected place that totally takes you in the seemingly correct path for answers, or to the people who have the answers that you're looking for. Things like a book falling down, a page falling out of the book, and the book having a picture with exactly the item that you're looking for on eBay for something that you're doing for an experiment in the moment. Like, it's like the universe is sending you a crystal clear signal that isn't necessarily like, oh, that's weird, I know 2 people named Kyle, what a coincidence. Like it's like something much stronger than that, if that makes sense, in my personal perspective. And that's kind of what spurred on Carl to even get involved in it, and goes from there.
Yeah. And it almost brings in a layer of intuition too when you think about that, because you have to be aware of it. You have to have your eyes open to recognize that they're happening. And so, like with Spirits of the Stanley, you know, Carl mentions his spidey senses, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's like form of intuition. And then you jump into Hellier here, where you have these synchronicities that you guys are open to recognizing, discussing, even though sometimes it seems on the show that they're so obvious, they're like slapping you in the face, like the numbers, how long a conversation lasts versus, you know, those specific numbers occurring somewhere else as well. And I think it's important to note that when you're doing these types of investigations or cases or research, you shouldn't just dismiss them. You know, there's something that if you keep a record of, you'll notice over time, wow, there's a lot more of these than we realize.
You write those down and you notice a pattern, like a dream journal or something like that. But even especially the most powerful ones with 5 stars next to them, like that 48 thing with the numbers. That's basically what, I mean, Tyler was already like doing good work for the case. But honestly, in my mind, and I know he's watching this right now, that was like the universe being like, no, like this guy, you need to get like this guy's mindset here, because it happened and he had no idea. Stuff like that.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, so I guess, you know, continuing on with Hellier and everything, and spoiler for anybody watching who hasn't watched any of it yet, we couldn't get away without talking about it. I guess, you know, in season 1, probably one of the most simple, but probably also one of the most validating forms of evidence would, in my opinion, and I think other people who have watched, is the tin can. Yeah, my biggest question is, you know, could you explain what it was like when you received that message, and, you know, and also I think the biggest one is, you know, how you felt when you actually, you know, when the tin can was stumbled upon. You know, me being an open sensitive, that's why I don't haven't really done that method too much, because, you know, I don't really know how it might affect me. But, you know, I just, you know, what was your whole thought about that whole process when that happened?
So that happened, the actual vision of the can itself was something that occurred right at the very end of the session itself. So I had already been under for, I believe, just over an hour. Like it was like a long time. You know, when we're doing these sessions, we don't just sit and we're like, all right, put 5 minutes on, we'll get our directions. It's you kind of fall into this. So in a sense, I think maybe at my like deepest level or whatever you want to say for that session. And it was way in there. And suddenly, as I'm just kind of zoned out listening to this, something that had never happened before, because I'm such an auditory person. Like I'm a sound guy, I'm a musician. Like I do the Estes stuff, like something that had never happened before. And I'm not sensitive. We could go on about like mediums. I don't even know if I believe in mediums. Like the whole thing is that if we're talking about a message being like, boom, slammed into your brain, that black void of my vision was just suddenly filled with that image of a tin can. In more specificity, I saw it was sort of a camera panning out. The tin can, there was a blank tin can with no label on it. And I'm so glad I said something, you know, when I did, because if you see something, say something, you know, like the airport, you've got to. So, it was sitting on a table that was folded up, kind of like a ping pong table, with a bright pink tablecloth on it. And I saw the can really closely, and then it sort of faded out. And it looked like it was in like one of the old like basement rooms at my college that I recognized. I wasn't sure on that, but I was so weird that like clearly this can was set up to be like taken pictures of or something on this table. And I said that, and I was like, I just saw like this tin can. And when I said it, weird. I don't know if I didn't know if I was hanging into like a dream. And then suddenly when it appeared in real life later on, that was like, honestly, one of the top 3 like paranormal experiences that I've ever had and probably ever will have. Like to have some sort of like, I don't want to say like prophetic vision, but like whatever occurred a couple of nights earlier, basically, I don't know if something place that can there afterwards. I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's necessarily about an alien walking up and putting a can there. I think that the can was there and was probably left by somebody who was camping out at the cave, very remote cave, and I will say didn't have other trash around it. It's not like it was like a littered place. But it being there was just sort of some sort of vision that whatever state that I was in was seemingly legitimate contact with the other. And in a sense, I was amazed by the can, but what it did is it kind of gave me more validation for the entire rest of the session itself. And was like, well, what else was said? You know, like what else was going on here? Because it certainly seems now like something was definitely talking. Mm-hmm. And it made me give that whole thing another look.
Yeah. I almost got the impression when you guys found the tin can, and you can tell me if I'm completely off base with this, but you almost seemed like freaked out or scared, like, whoa, like this thing actually intruded my psyche. You know, whatever I was communicating with, that got to me.
Felt slightly invasive for sure. Yeah, in a sense. But I'm not like, it's not like I'm trying to put up blockers or something like that. Like I'm into this, like let's do it. But was bizarre in that sense, yeah.
Does it make you almost hesitate a little bit in the future to almost have some type of psychic protections when you get that deep into it using the Estes method?
Honestly, not necessarily, but that may be just my personality defect or bonus or whatever you want to call it. Like we'll kind of see what happens because I believe in the method so much, I guess. You know, I'm ready to experience whatever I can. I've yet to have a vision since. I mean, that's not something that happens now. It was weird.
So strange to do. Yes, that is true. We like to say there's no such thing as coincidences. It's probably the same thing with synchronicities. So
yeah. You've got to. Just like you keep a dream journal when you wake up. I have a notes app on my phone, you know, and it's filled with a bunch of garbled messes because I'm half asleep most of the time. But a synchronicity journal may be even better because you're aware of them when they're happening. Help give you some direction in the universe, I think, possibly for sure.
Yeah. So cool. So another kind of instance that happened, this one actually on season 2 of the show, there was a rather intense scene where you and Dana Newkirk were in that building, and she was almost being used as a conduit for communication. So you two were both kind of using that sensory deprivation and having a conversation with each other, not even realizing it. I believe is kind of how I took that whole scenario as going down. Do you feel in that moment you guys were speaking with potential aliens or like interdimensional species? And what was that like, that being in it like that?
I think that it's possible in the moment that it was, because looking back and viewing these transcripts and things and the way that session played out, honestly, the most, I guess you could say, convincing piece of, I don't want to say evidence, but I don't know another like word for it, was that I noticed that the session got really quiet and dimmed, and I stopped hearing stuff as soon as Dana's helmet session had finished. The exactness of that time frame was really impressive. If we're considering that what we were attempting to do was send out a larger signal into whatever was out there, thinking that the domes in Point Pleasant might only not be necessary. It could be a good locale, definitely like a spooky place to be, but like literally the shape of it being a projector of something, a message to send out, and a place that people believe that they've had contact with aliens and weird things before too, seemed like a good place to do it. And so we tried that, but I will say, from my view, it just felt like an Estes session. Like it wasn't like I felt like I was floating on some higher plane or something like that. It was like kind of what I was used to in a session. I think she's the one that had the more, I don't want to say transcendental experience, but something beyond that. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel it could be because of her background in using more spiritualistic techniques? That
it could be. She's the only one. She's the person that I believe, except for maybe literally like the students or people who experimented with Persinger. I think Dana Newkirk has worn the Corrin helmet or the God helmet more than anybody else. Like, I don't know who else is running this kind of a thing. And by the way, as a disclaimer, don't make like a homemade one, everybody listening, because that's like a very particular like neuroscience thing, and don't mess up your brain with magnets. Go to like the university and be prepared to spend a lot of money. But the idea with that helmet kind of was like basically simulating a religious or sort of like transcendental experience in a simulation around the correct cortexes of the brain that goes beyond what I necessarily understand. But she is one of the most spiritual people that I know. She's also very grounded. She loves the books and like the records and stuff like that, but she's also like practices meditation so frequently, like is always like pushing it, and is probably the best person that I know at it. So she may be exactly the right kind of person to do that.
So she basically can get in that mental state, you think, a little bit deeper than
It's
others?
important. Yeah. I mean, people all the time, people send us messages of like, why don't you guys do ayahuasca out there? Why don't you do? And it's kind of like, we're not necessarily interested in synthetics like substances because then as investigators, what do we know? What can we do? But like, how can we, in a sound state of mind, that we can perceive what we can in a more admissible format? Yeah. It's the name of the game, isn't it?
We have another question here. As of today, do all of you think Terry Wrist is real? A fake name as cover for someone else? Question mark.
That's a big question. I can't speak for everybody, and I don't know that I necessarily know what everybody knows, but they don't. I don't know what everybody else knows, I should say. Like, we honestly like try and like stay in contact and like all kind of intentionally kind of branch out and do like our own things. Like, people probably notice. But for myself, I don't think that Terry Wrist is an alien. I don't think that he's an ultra-terrestrial entity, and I don't think that he's a man in black, even though the mysteriousness of that email certainly feels and looks and has the font and everything of those disinformation agents. I believe that was I don't want to say a ploy, but sort of like the cover of the individual putting something forward. I'm trying to like bounce around this question without being like I don't know. I don't know if he's real or not, but I definitely think that there is a person who goes by the name Terry Wrist, and that individual is out there, and that individual is known in some circles, maybe by something else. Maybe he is somebody that has had his finger on the pulse of the Newkirks in the case for a while. Maybe not. I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that question, but I will say, Lonnie, that I think that the likelihood of it being a fake name from the beginning was pretty high. Seems weird that somebody would have that legitimate name. We have had emails from people who claim a lot of different things about Terry, people who claim to be Terry, people who claim we're getting really good at being email detectives and finding out what we can, which is a stark contrast to how much we were stumbling around in season 1 with what an IP address is or how that works and things like that. It's an ongoing thing.
Mm-hmm.
As I have the numbers behind me, I think on this old board, I told you guys this is like my older board. Yeah, so there they are.
Blue. When you guys found the blue balloon, why didn't you do recon in the area where you found it?
That area that we found it was directly adjacent to. It was just a road that cut through private property. The road itself was, like we were saying, just outside of that Somerset, in a very particular location, in a particular area. That what happened was, it was so poignant that the tree was down where it was. The way that timeline actually worked out, because the episode actually does it really well, the way that Carl sort of pieced it together, and we get eyes on like helping him piece it together, but he's kind of like the real mastermind of like trying to tell this really convoluted story. It was the morning after we talked to Greenfield that we found the balloon. So we had basically finished talking to Alan Greenfield at like 5 a.m., dropped him back off at his apartment. And I remember on the way back, we stopped because we wanted something to eat because it had been a really long, really confusing night. Stopped at a gas station, and I got ice cream bars for everybody. And so we sat there while the sun was coming up in that hotel room and had like ice cream bars at like 6 a.m. And then got a few hours of sleep, woke up before it was checkout time, left the hotel, drove back, was like, hey, Greg was basically like, you guys want to, because it's kind of on the way, do you guys want to drive through like where this alleged locale is? Drove through, and like it's on film, like the way that trunk was positioned was to get cars to stop and to get that car to stop. And I probably was more afraid in that moment than I ever was in everybody, but it was like a real people thing at that point. Because we're way back there and heard these really scary alleged things about this area. And the tree trunk was blocking our car from moving forward. And it was such a curvy dirt road that we couldn't clearly back up. So it was like, we got to give out and move this tree. I mean, there's no other way around it. And it felt, I was legitimately nervous that like, I mean, in the moment, it's easy to like laugh about now, but like in the moment, like, you don't know, like, is there some guy in a ghillie suit that's like waiting to come up with a knife, like hiding off to the woods, like wanted cars to stop there? Like, we don't know. Yeah. And so we're like freaked out and push that tree aside. And as we're doing it, Greg and I see this really shiny thing off to the side. I thought it was maybe one of those like not disposable, but like small, like lunch pail things. Cause it was like that silver blue color. And walked back up, and it was like both of us nearly was like, no, that's not. And it was a blue star, which literally Alan Greenfield had just talked about the balloons and Sirius and blue stars to us like 7 hours earlier. Mm-hmm. It was insane, the time frame that occurred in. And it was like, well, the only thing that we could ever think about was like, and there's just no way that it could have happened. I mean, we were talking with Alan all night, mm-hmm. and it's like, how does he even know where we want to go? Like, did he call somebody and tell him to put a blue star? It's like he had no idea that we were even going way off the beaten path on these new emails that he didn't know. You know, it was a weird one. It was a weird one.
Just yet another synchronicity.
Mm-hmm.
Alan Greenfield.
A lot of people are convinced of that. I like that.
The expertise, the occasional ring in our ears is an intelligence or purposeful.
If we're talking about tinnitus from a auditory standpoint, it's kind of just it's a side effect of like hearing a lot of loud noises over time, that your eardrum is a little bit damaged and is giving your mind that perception. The problem that what I like about that, and just to follow that frame of thought for a second of like, what if it is a paranormal thing? I mean, maybe if we're saying a whole lot of maybes as you follow down this time frame or rabbit hole, perhaps a ringing in an ear could be an attempt to cover up something, if you want to get really conspiratorial with it. But almost more likely, and I think what he's referencing is that I noticed that my ears started ringing when Greg was talking about a particular thing while we were doing an interview with him. And I don't think my ears were that tired by that point. It felt like an outside influence making that happen. So I think that there may be intelligence to it, but most of the time not, I guess would be the answer. I do want to say like one quick thing though about the way that ears work. And I hope that paranormal investigators and people who are watching this will look more into the way that sound works. You should know what your hearing range is. Like before you listen to EVPs and stuff like that, it's like knowing how good your eyesight is. Like, you should do these tests and not only know your perceptive ability, but also the perception of your audio recorders, because it's sitting there right there in the manual of these audio recorders. It's called the frequency response, which is meaning sound waves or small frequencies that they pick up on. And how many times did we on old episodes of ghost TV shows, well, EVP is something that we can't hear with our own ears. You will notice most of the time that the frequency response of your handheld audio recorder is worse than your ears. So you should be able to hear what the audio recorder is hearing. So what implications does that have? Likely more mechanical, that whatever these intelligences are, they aren't communicating in a way that our ears can't hear it. They're communicating and somehow imprinting the message that they want to send onto the mechanical device itself.
That's an actual really interesting point, because instead of manipulating the sound waves around you, they're manipulating the device. Is kind of what you're saying.
Exactly. I think that that's the case most of the time. Looking at the numbers and looking at the data of it, it's really honestly the only thing that makes sense to me. Because I know what my ears are. I can look at the frequency response of this EVP that I caught. Why did I not hear that? Why is this thing hearing it, but I'm not? It's because it's on the device itself, which in addition is another interesting reason that AVP is cool, being analog voice phenomena, right? So using cassette recorders and tape recorders, because with that, that changes it. It's a whole other theory. So if we're talking about digital recorders picking up things that we can't hear, that is somehow an entity, a ghost. It sounds like I'm being super skeptical about this, and I kind of am, but I've caught the crazy EVPs myself, so I'm with you guys. That is a ghost changing zeros and ones in the code that is sitting on your audio recorder into something that we can perceive. How are they doing that? And what sort of computational knowledge do they have in order to make that occur? Or is it just willfulness? I don't know. So that's digital recorders. And then we talk about analog recorders of cassettes. That's when you can get literal physical evidence of spirits. So if we're recording with a cassette recorder and you say, all right, we got an EVP from here to here, you can clip that out of the tape and hold it up and say, this is a ghost voice. That's cool. That's cool.
That is cool.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Do any of you feel that the true purpose of Hellier and releasing it to such a wide audience is, in a very roundabout and extreme way, complete the ritual that is pulling us all into the synchronicity loop until something much greater happens?
I feel like if I'm trying to be I think that there's a really humbling nature to it, where we have been really grateful for the opportunity. And just so everybody knows, Hellier is not like an Amazon Prime original. It's not like we put it up there and we were able to get it through their stuff, but we made it. It's all us. I mean, it was a crew of about 7 people, including musicians who did this. And we have this small crew who has a story to tell. And we're going through this whole season with all of these people now paying attuned to this case. Oftentimes it feels like, in a sense, in a tune of the way that almost like the Mothman prophecies in the late 60s, early 70s was going around. It was really interesting to people, and people started to flock to these areas. But I don't want to necessarily put us in the same category as Keel of we're not at whatever that status, or whether you agree with him or not on various things. But it's that's the closest thing that I can compare. It's a weird case that is now out in the open, that is literally open for anybody to get the information. And it is humbling to think that we could be just the messengers. That it's and I think even Greg would say this too. He's Hellier isn't me, the emails, but it's a part of this much larger thing. And it's cool. I don't know if that gets passed on to somebody else. Maybe some people feel more inclined or feel that it is them when it isn't, or feel that maybe it's going to be a group of kids in 30 years that whatever, are able to continue doing something. We don't know. But it's pretty weird, and we're grateful for the opportunity to sort of continue telling that story.
Well, in that train of thought, not to get to this question, because we will, going back to the initial catalyst of the show. So you get this, or Greg got this email from David Christie, who turns out to, as far as you guys could find, not have even lived or existed in the town. What is the possibility that he was kind of just created to set off the catalyst of the whole show and almost start off that ritual, as she called it, of, the entire event and bringing it to the attention of everyone? Like, so David Christie, he himself is kind of like that giant question mark of where did he come from? Does he exist? Did he ever exist? Was he made up? Is he a person? Was he created? Like,
exactly. See, this is everything that you just said is what keeps me up at night, because it's like, what in the world? It is, you kind of set it on a shelf sometimes, but most of the times, I'll be sitting there eating a plate of spaghetti, just like watching the news or something, and then it just hits you. You're like, is David's daughter out there in like 6th grade right now, and she had this happen, and like it's become a part of this like larger consensus, and all these people know about this story now? Like, did that happen to people?
Mm-hmm.
It certainly seems to me like something did. The problem is, and I think that a lot of people are, and I don't want to necessarily give any digs at particular like groups of people, but a lot of people who are a lot more into who go really far into the mysticism of it, stuff that isn't necessarily my forte, but it's like, even Greenfield says it on the show, and this is, and he would open a welcome dialogue about this as well, but I don't know that I necessarily agree with him. It's like, well, it's not about the whoever wrote the marks on the trees. It's about following the path. That doesn't change the fact. It's like, I want to know who wrote the marks on the trees. Like what started this? I'm just sort of asking the same questions that you are in different formats, but I will say this. David, everything sort of lined up. When we lined up the EXIF data of those photos, when we lined up what he claimed was going on in that moment, somebody was in that time sending Greg over all of this information. If it was a hoax, it is the most insanely elaborate concoction of everything that I could imagine. And if it was a hoax, they did it in the perception that this would be just an email going to Greg Newkirk, who was a mid-time paranormal blogger in 2012. I mean, the larger implications of like what have happened in the last 7-8 years after that certainly give the feeling that it's something larger. And I'm glad that the story is being told, and there's a lot of people working on it now. Like, I'm grateful for that, because it's not just us. Even like Chad and stuff, like he's become like a pretty major part in these capabilities of searching the cipher and things like that. He built the website that helps, change normal text into cipher values and things like that. Kind of takes a village. But a lot of people, getting back to really quickly what I was saying, a lot of people dismiss David Christie and are like, well, okay, David's not real. But you can't do that. You have to accept David and Terry as a uniformed unit together, because Terry came about through David. It's the first email of the first line of the first email. It's like something is like, my name is, I have them right here. My name is David Christie. I received your contact information through a mutual friend of ours who claims that you are well equipped to handle peculiar problems. Those are the first words of the email. It's Terry right there from the beginning. So who is it that knows this guy? Are they the same guy? Certainly seems like David Christie is a lot better of a speller and orator than Terry is in the way that they write emails.
It's all a big jumbled mystery.
One big question mark. I'm like, you know.
It does. And it's so easy to keep going down that rabbit hole of what if, or if that happened, or what if that's the case, and you just tumble down and your brain can go spinning.
Yeah.
A million different directions. Let's see. If Risk sent you numbers a few years ago to do the Blue Star ritual, and the book it references is about summoning aliens, and sent an email that asked why Greg turned back, doesn't he intend you to do that ritual in that cave with the blocked entrance to summon goblin-looking aliens in that particular cave? It's supposed to be an alien cave base. The ritual is to summon aliens.
That's a convoluted whole thing, but I see where you're going with that. The idea that, well, now you got to do this Blue Star ritual and this and this and this. It's honestly, I feel like a politician. Like I can't I have to deflect this question because I don't really know enough about what the Blue Star ritual even is. And there's whole people who are into Thelema, which isn't necessarily something that I even subscribe to or necessarily believe in, where it's like, who allegedly know a lot more than this. If the intention of the numbers of the initial email, why did you stop when you were so close, is open to interpretation. Why did you stop when you were so close could be probably, I would argue, likely referencing some of the work that Greg and Dana were doing in the Brown Mountain area, or with their various experiments at that time, which were included in that more vague article that he was writing back in the day. We don't know exactly what Terry meant, but the ritual itself, bringing about goblin-like beings, I don't know. That question would have to go to somebody who knows a little bit more about that whole thing. And in addition, it sounds like to me, based off my limited knowledge about it, if that ever even did happen, it certainly wouldn't be something that happens on camera, because I don't think that it's my understanding that it's some sort of sex ritual that I don't know anything about how it works, and I wouldn't really want to do it myself. It gets into some really weird stuff that I don't understand, so I'll just push that question along.
We'll have to Google it later.
All right. So, as a fellow audio guy here, have you ever played the tones while doing the Estes method? Maybe using a mixer so you can have an undercurrent of tones constantly playing while doing Estes.
Yeah, I like that. I have actually not done that myself. It's crossed my mind. The closest that I've done is just playing the tones out loud in the room itself while somebody is on method. But it's very easy because it's just a simple 3.5 millimeters. It's just a headphone jack that you can have a splitter going into the spirit box or going into your headphones or whatever, to have multiple things influencing the headphones of the individual who is doing that. If that is some sort of magic concoction, that would be really impressive and also kind of fit along with the narrative of Dana heard the tones while she was on the method. So I like that. I think that a lot of people argue about what the tones, not necessarily what the tone should be, but what the tone should sound like. And until I guess I feel more comfortable with that being a little bit more solid, would be something that would be good to move forward with, for sure. That's good stuff. Will I do another Estes method soon? Sure. I mean, honestly, like I was saying, I kind of do them in my house anyway, sometimes every now and then, because I feel like I just don't broadcast it. I wouldn't know necessarily what to do, but my girlfriend's interested in being she's getting better at being a question asker, or my even some family members and friends, if I could ever see them again, if the pandemic here, the end of the world stopped. But the thing is, I would recommend to anybody who's interested in the method to practice. It's weird to me that so many investigators basically consider themselves I'm going to go out to an investigation and I'm going to investigate here, and they don't necessarily know their tools very well or something like that, which isn't necessarily a knock on them. That's a lot of television tropes that have been sort of ingrained in the culture throughout the years. But that's like, to me, that's like being like an NBA player and only shooting hoops when you're like on the court in front of 30,000 people. Like, you've got to practice in a localized environment as well.
Mhm. Have you ever heard music during the Estes method before?
Only humming, only like slight, like potential humming down low. But the thing is with that, it gets into a weird spot where I don't have the answer to this. And I think a lot of people who are probably watching are like, have practiced or done the method themselves. I don't know what's the box and what's my subconscious mind picking up on something else. Like, it wouldn't make sense for you to hear entire songs. It would mean that your spirit box is not working. And of course, it's like, you're always going to, like, there's no way that you're going to put the box on and not hear anything. At the very least, you're going to hear little blips of radio interference. It's about those connected tissue messages. If I do hear a song though, and it's ever like a crystal clear thing, I'll tweet it out and see if that means anything to anyone, but have yet to have a full on song, which is interesting because I have songs in my head all the time.
I think the tones were meant to be used like in an old school telephone. They are the carrier tone that is modulated to carry speech. They wanted you to build a spirit phone.
Totally possible. I mean, Thomas Edison himself was allegedly working on a telephone of the dead. Whether that means aliens or ghosts or what, I'm not sure. You get into ITC. If you get into ITC and are doing it with a bit of a skeptical mindset or whatever sort of research-based orientation you can, look up people like Mark Macy. Look up people like there's the paranormal community, ITC being a larger like rainbow here. There's like the paranormal community, and there's also like the ITC research community, which is like instrumental transcommunication. Some people say interdimensional, but it's like just using some sort of element to communicate with some other. So like ITC is technically even like divination bowls or like staring into dark mirrors or doing that kind of stuff. But if we're talking about electronic ITC, there are whole groups of people that are not involved in quote unquote the paranormal, who are studying, like, who claim to have messages from people like Konstantin Radova, like on their answering machines, who claim to get calls from dead people, who a lot of them, it's hard because a lot of them are people who have lost loved ones. And of course, as like skeptical like psychologist, you're kind of like, well, what's streaming out? But then if this is legitimate stuff, you hear some of these messages and some of the phone calls and answering messages that these people have. It is crazy. And I wish that it's something that the paranormal community knew a little bit more about or paid a little bit more attention to. But again, I'm not one to claim the legitimacy of it. I'm just interested in the research.
As a musician, have you been sent music in any other type of way?
I will say, this is a joke. The term musician, I guess, is loosely applied to the drummer of the band. But I have, like, I know I play some, like, a little bit of piano, a little bit of guitar, just enough to like know some basic stuff. And I have yet to be completely inspired by like receiving melodies myself. I'm happy to have like bandmates who are mainly more song writers and I'm more like song structuralists, as we're like piecing it all together. And if we're talking about the way that music is often perceived, it's like a beautiful way to connect people. Like, what a cool way also spiritually if like something came forward to be able to do that. But you know, it's the biggest song that I guess that I felt inspiration for was probably the Hellier theme itself, which was actually written by my friend Anthony Sistone, who did the whole music. We were in a band called West Side Saints like 3-4 years ago for a little while, and as a little side thing had all these old files that were like just like some melodies and this and that. And when I knew that Hellier was going to become a thing in a documentary, and we wanted to put like a theme to it, I went through those old files, and it really struck out to me, like that melody there. And then Anthony took it to a whole other level and spruced it up. Now a lot of people really like the theme, which is very cool. So yeah, I was proud to recognize it, but like all credit and kudos to him.
It is a cool song.
It is really.
Just for my own curiosity, I don't know if you're familiar with binaural beats at all, but as a sound guy, what do you feel the legitimacy of it is? Because I know a lot of people feel it changes the frequency of your brain to match a certain like opening, where it kind of opens you more up to spirit. Do you recognize, like, what are your feelings on that? Do you believe that, or what's the science behind that?
That's cool. I know only a little bit about it enough as like from like a layman perspective. I think that it could absolutely be legitimately possible if we are looking at all of our senses, and sort of the beauty of the paranormal is reaching out to the mysteries using what we can of our five senses. And we're talking about sound. Sound is one that is really popularized in the form of like EVP, but it's not one that is necessarily explored enough. So I was glad that the show, like in Hellier, like, and keep in mind, Hellier only showed like a very, very small portion of like, basically it was like really quick. You know, we were like, okay, well, these tones, well, we do this and this and this. It's not like something that we had a whole like team working on for months. It was like, well, we'll try this. We're still like open to trying and like doing more things with it. Could totally open you up. I think that more likely and common is the idea of synchronizing your heartbeat with the music around you, and entering into a really comfortable, I don't want to say like womb-like, but sort of like this is like a zone to be in, as you're surrounded by that sound. And that's even why like dance music and pop music works so well. It all sits around these similar like BPMs, you know, like you've got like your 95 beats per minute, which is like about the average person like jumping around dancing, and it like gets into your vibes like that. It's cool.
Yeah. Okay, so we only have about 15 minutes left. So maybe we'll just have one or two more questions, unless Brittany, you have anything else from the live audience. But I mean, we have plenty of questions ourselves too. So
Got that
do
one.
any of you subscribe to the ritual aspect of any of this, the witchcraft and spell work and all of that?
Well, I think we all, in a sense, sort of subscribe to it in a lot of like varying forms. Of course, Dana and even Greg are more involved in that side that I know a little bit less about. I come to it from more of the perspective of being like a documentarian, you know, like a detective, like let's try and figure out that, which is the really kind of the beautiful thing is that Carl is the eyes of the audience, and he actively participates, of course, but he's able to just sit back and show what each individual team member's perspective is on everything that's happening around us. So yeah, of course, if we're talking about me particularly, I subscribe to definitely the vibes, the synchronicities, the feeling of certain locations and places, and knowing that something clicks and changes over when communication or whatever is occurring. While I'm not practicing witchcraft myself, I'm a Catholic, you know, which is kind of like part of the thing where it's like we have different perspectives on this. But if we're talking about witchcraft being about these sort of like repetitive, like natural things, like if I sit and I'm praying to, you know, I love animals a lot. So like we'll pray to like St. Francis. So we're talking about these like really meditative zones of like prayer. Maybe it's not necessarily all that different. And maybe that's something that the show kind of helps put out there a little bit.
Mm-hmm. What is the most recent synchronicity that you have personally experienced?
Probably in my rereading of, that's a hard one. I'm reading through a few different texts for kind of Hellier-ish research on whatever like small time frame, but it's hard because I feel like I have to put on a certain hat, and it's taken on this whole like snowball weight of its own, where it's hard to just sort of like casually be sitting around doing this. But I will say that I have been interested in a couple of texts, which I can maybe mention later. I don't know. The most recent one that immediately comes to mind is looking at Woodrow Derenberger's Visitors from Lanulos, more recently opening it up to a page, and it being about Bruce Parsons, the police officer of Point Pleasant at that time, which was a nice little thing that wasn't necessarily mentioned in the show, because I was just like, oh yeah, that's right. There's a guy named Parsons in here, and we kept seeing the name everywhere. So that was a fun one.
That's cool. So one question we actually had was in season 2 of the show. You guys mentioned that a lot of the areas you went to, for some reason, I guess this is another synchronicity, had a lot of borders or bridges to them, right? Mm-hmm. That kind of theme was there. And I guess for what we were kind of thinking or wanted to ask was, do you feel that could have anything to do with the flow of the water? Because that's thought to be like a conduit for energy or communication. So do you feel it's the border or the bridge, or do you feel possibly it's the water that could be causing that?
Interesting. If I had to pick one, I would be more likely, this sounds probably unexpected, but I would be more likely to pick the bridge being a slightly more powerful influencer. But I say that with the precipice that, and you guys probably know this and look into this too, running water near or like underneath like clients' homes and stuff like that seems to also be a fairly common indicator of like some sort of something going on. But here's where my time frame, or my current frame of mind, again, I could have changed my mind about all of this, throughout that I've just said, which is kind of like the beauty of it, right? The current idea that I have with that, and I think that Carl would probably agree with me with, is the idea behind bridges and borders is an idea of liminal transition. And so if you have an individual who is knowingly changing into something else, their frame of mind, which is usually, we're talking about our like stream of consciousness, we usually have, I like to think of it as like usually having literal like brick walls within our minds. And those are something that is just our daily life. And it's a beautiful thing. There's nothing wrong with it. It's like, this is how we go about, we do this, I brush my teeth, I do this, and there's an order to your life. When you are going through a state of transition, and that can be transitionary relationships, that can be transitionary locations, a mental transition or something like that, I really think that those brick walls start to notice something changing and shifting, and they start to have little cracks in them and little holes. And if you think about the phenomena being on, can't angle it, on one side and us being on the other, and it starts to get weaker and weaker, then they can come through, and you can perceive more of whatever that other is. So how that relates to bridges is, the idea is that if you have a bridge, which is usually, and we're talking about bridges and borders, border states, border lines, things like that, where there's a sign on the bridge that says, welcome to West Virginia, welcome to Oregon. You're crossing that and knowing that you're like liminally transitioning into something else. And that is kind of my idea with it, if that makes sense or isn't convoluted at all. I try and, it's weird. I don't even know myself, but we'll try.
I love it.
No, that was great. It was great. All right. Well, we have one final question that we ask everybody that we talk to. But before I do that, Ron or Britt, did you have anything you wanted to kind of bring up or ask really quick? We have about 5 minutes.
I don't. I mean, I think that my biggest stuff was from watching Hellier was the bridges, the water, the tin can, and just the whole concept of where you came from, getting into the show and starting to branch out and looking for answers from the first initial email that started the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's a great combination of pretty much anything considered to be paranormal. That's for sure.
I love it. It's like we're right there with you guys. Like every time I'm watching, I'm like,
uh-huh.
like
Yeah.
Like how? What? You know? I love it.
You are, and we're there. I mean, it's not like this is something that's like, it's so unreachable. It's like we're all five of us, like we're all online all the time. We read everything. We don't read a lot of YouTube comments because they're usually mean, but we go through and check it out. It's like, we want to know what's the input on this case, who has other leads. Let's go.
Yeah,
Hell yeah.
definitely.
I think like anyone can go through something like that, you know. So it's great that that's out there, that we all have access to it. We can watch something like that and just like take mental note, just so like, we all know if we all go down this path somehow with a case that's like, you know, falls in our laps, we're like, okay, all right, write it all down. Like
we're collecting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good to know.
We'll have a board like you have behind you in our houses, you know.
Hell yeah.
Better time. You need a slow motion camera scanning over it a few times. That seems to be part of the taste.
Okay. So our final question, which we love asking people, is in regards to a single moment that you've had that we like to call your oh shit moment. Meaning, okay, you have an interest in the paranormal, you're out there, you're doing stuff, and then this moment happens that makes you sit there and go, oh shit, this stuff is real. Okay. What was that moment for you?
I will say, and I'll probably like I mentioned, like the childhood experiences and stuff like that. The state of like, I don't know what's a dream, what's not, certainly seemed to be real. What I was seeing in my room myself. So I'll sort of like set aside that experience initially as like a precipice of like the whole thing that got me like into this. But I do believe that I definitely experienced something when I was like 11 years old and saw an image in my room. But I will say, as far as an investigative standpoint goes, my oh shit moment probably came across at the Stanley Hotel, sitting up again in the balcony, which you can see on Spirits of the Stanley. And we heard downstairs, which was empty, the clearest female laugh and giggle and walk away that went on for probably about 5 to 7 seconds, which sounds short, but felt like an eternity in the paranormal. In an empty building at the bottom of the hill, with my friend Alex there, heard this clear as day, like a little schoolgirl giggling right below us. And it's rare to have that sort of, I can count on one hand the number of like really audible experiences like that. I've yet to have like, boom, here's a human apparition in front of me. As far as I know, everybody that I've communicated with in my life has been corporeal, but like the idea of like that laugh, that was somebody right there. And we ran all over the place. Nobody snuck in. This was a girl's giggle that went on for a long time and was laughing right with us. That was right there. And I loved it. And that kind of what I think helps spur on a lot of interest in sound and like what's going on here.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Yeah.
It was a great conversation. We loved everything that you informed us of and all your answers tonight. So anybody that's watching, if you've been under a rock and haven't seen Hellier, please go and see seasons 1 and 2. It will blow your mind.
Yeah.
And as well as Spirits of the Stanley. And we look forward to your future projects.
Thank you. We have more stories to tell. I think we'll continue working on it. And I really appreciate everybody like sending in the comments and questions and stuff, like people watching. It's a lot of fun to do this. It's been I think I speak for probably everybody in America. It's been a lonely while, and like we're all grateful to like have friends, just have moments to sit back and talk about the stuff that we love. So thanks for setting this up, guys. I appreciate it. And adopt some animals and stay strange.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Everybody have a great night. Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you. Good night, everyone.